And you are now live.
This is Senate Appropriations, and we're continuing our testimony on the fiscal 2023 budget. And we have testifying before the committee today the Chancellor and staff from Vermont State College System. And I know that Senator Baruch, that's his section of the budget, so he'll be paying close attention. And Chancellor, I see you have several staff here, if you would like to introduce them, and then your presentation, if you want. Obviously, we're a little different from the House in terms of the level of detail, but this is your opportunity to expand on your financial request, the transformation process that you're currently undertaking, and what is being proposed in the governor's budget, and then how that compares to what you think would be your desired level of funding. So with that, I'll let you introduce staff, and then you can go into your presentation.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you inviting us here today. For the record, I'm Sophie Zadatny, the Chancellor of the Vermont State College System. I'm joined by Sharon Scott, who's our Chief Financial and Operating Officer, and Catherine Lavassa, who's our Director of External and Governmental Relations. And I think, as you alluded to, Senator Kitchell, I did want to let you know the House is not yet closed on our budget, and we would be more than happy to return to this committee once that's occurred. So we're very, very happy to be with you here today and share an update from the Vermont State College System on our ongoing system transformation and our budget request for FY 2023. So first of all, we're modernizing, streamlining, and revitalizing public higher education in Vermont with the legislatively mandated system-wide transformation. Second, we are hitting our transformation leading indicators and have strong progress to report to you on that today. And third, our institutions are social, cultural, and economic anchors in Vermont's rural communities, as well as providing higher education opportunities all across the corners of the state. So as you know, Vermont State College System currently consists of 4 institutions: the Community College of Vermont, Castleton University, Northern Vermont University, and Vermont Technical College. So as we move forward, I just want to paint a quick picture for you on how significant the transformation is that we're undertaking, and just take a quick look back at how we got to where we are today. So as you know, the Vermont State College System was already facing a significant and unsustainable structural deficit prior to COVID. We were pushed to the brink of insolvency and confronting the very real possibility of having to shutter 3 of our essential rural campuses. And the Vermont State College System, in partnership with the state, has committed to a complete and transparent system overhaul. This slide presents the composite financial index of the VSC over the past decade, and it's included here to illustrate both how dire the system's finances have been and for how long. So the composite financial index is a national measure that's used to assess the financial viability of institutions. And what's clear from this slide is that we didn't get into this situation that confronted us back in the spring of 2020 overnight. And as the Select Committee on the Future of Public Higher Education recognized in their report, we're not going to reverse our fortunes overnight either. Transformation is a multi-year process, and it's one on which we've made a strong and meaningful start, but we do need ongoing state support to become the state university system that the state and the students in the state need us to be. Guided by the state and the unanimous recommendations of the Select Committee, which were adopted by our board back in February of 2021, and then endorsed by the state in Act 74 of 2021, we are committed to significant and meaningful change. So again, we're modernizing our academic programs, we're streamlining our administrative processes, we're strengthening our student support services, and we're expanding our workforce development and continuing education programming. And we're committed to doing all of this in a way that enhances our offerings to Vermont learners, keeps public higher education accessible in our rural communities, increases affordability, and seeks to eliminate our structural deficit over the next 4 years. We are committed to a successful transformation, and I do want to take a moment to thank the committee and acknowledge the significant investment that you have supported in the Vermont State College System and in our students in this fiscal year. And as this slide shows, obviously we're in much better shape now than we were as a result of the help that we've received. And we're looking forward to, continuing this revolutionary transformation that we're undertaking to really become the higher education system of the future. You may have questions about this slide, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions later on this. I know it has a lot of information on it. So a cornerstone of our system transformation is our commitment to our rural campuses as educational and student support centers. And as outlined by the Select Committee, one of our main transformation goals is to unify Castleton University, Vermont Technical College, and Northern Vermont University into one single accredited institution while we maintain a physical presence in our current campus locations in Castleton, Linden, Johnson, Randolph, and Williston. The new university, which will be called Vermont State University, is scheduled to launch in July 1 of 2023. And at that time, the Vermont State College system will consist of two institutions, the Community College of Vermont and Vermont State University. Additionally, we will be consolidating administrative functions across the system to streamline services and our business practices to make sure that we're doing a better job of serving our students, our employees, and the state. We'll also be launching a new workforce development division, which will be unifying the existing workforce development functions at our current institutions and providing a single point of entry with a no wrong door approach for employers and students. We're looking to build on the strengths of the current programs. The division will be a one-stop shop for Vermonters, for Vermont businesses and industries, and our many employer partners. We've provided a handout to the committee that further describes this new division in the committee materials. So our vision is that Vermont State University will be the first truly statewide hybrid university, providing a high-quality education across all of our campuses and across the state, regardless of which location a student chooses. The goal is to use technology to provide the capacity and capability to deliver the personal one-on-one and group interactions that are so important to the relationship-based educational and transformative learning experiences for which our colleges and universities are known. At the same time, providing these programs, experiences, and services in a hybrid way allows us to expand access to the high quality and personalized education to more people across Vermont and beyond. And this approach will not be limited to instruction, but also includes hybrid models for advising, health supports, financial aid, tutoring, and more. These are systems that are already being adopted by colleges and universities across the country, and their use is increasingly expected both by students and their families. So we are looking to build on what we've learned about working and studying remotely during the pandemic to increase flexibility in our delivery of our student-facing services. We already do provide a mix of programs and courses in a variety of learning modalities, and student options for hybrid, face-to-face, and online will continue to expand as faculty finalize the programs that will be offered at Vermont State University. As we build out our student services and support, we're taking a digital-first perspective to ensure consistent quality and access for students across all locations and modalities. And all of this is made possible by the investment of the state last year in transformation funding, the continued investment in the needed one-time bridge funding to help us transform strategically and meaningfully, and the proposed needed increase to our base appropriation as outlined in the Select Committee. Importantly, the transformation of the Vermont State Colleges is being accomplished without raising tuition and by using state funds, not student tuition dollars, to cover the cost of this necessary and important work. And I do want to note that our board recently approved that we freeze tuition for a second year for the 2022-2023 academic year. So in Act 74 of 2021, the state acknowledged the need for the Vermont State College system to transform and outlined annual benchmarks for the VSC to share with the legislature. So I'm pleased to report today that some of our transformation successes include establishing a unified system-wide budget, accomplishing the first step of our structural deficit reduction, adopting a professional strategic project management approach to the transformation work, which is sort of captured in the slide that you're looking at right now. We're also making tremendous progress on overhauling our academic program array in collaboration with our faculty to combine over 250 programs into about 100 higher quality, career ready, and relevant options. We've also determined the mission and vision for Vermont State University, and we've launched the search for the first president of Vermont State University. And in fact, I can share with you that we have several finalists for the Vermont State University president position coming to our campuses over the next 2 weeks. We're also looking to schedule a brand launch for Vermont State University in mid-April. So there's a lot of work happening and continuing to happen as we move forward. So our transformation work will be ongoing for several years. We currently have over 150 faculty, staff, and administrators serving on our 4 core teams to do this work. So the 4 core teams were the ones that were shown on the previous slide. And we have more folks being added to project-specific teams as we move forward. 87 faculty members were engaged in the program array work for the new university starting last summer, which has continued through this academic year. We also have approximately a dozen faculty leaders working on the faculty governance structure for the new university. In addition, we created a student advisory council. That council has been assisting us with the transformation work and providing valuable feedback and ideas. So as you can see, the transformation timeline over the next few academic years for each of the 4 key teams that we're working with right now. So a critical aspect of transformation is the development of a 10-year strategic plan for managing the Vermont State College's physical assets in a fiscally sustainable manner, while we also maintain reasonable net asset value, meet the needs of Vermont learners, and simultaneously retain our current campuses as educational and student support centers. We recently concluded the foundational work for our strategic facilities planning efforts, and this work included a return on physical assets study, facilities assessments, and a space utilization study. Together, these studies provide a complete and accurate picture of the facilities at Vermont State Colleges. So some of the key takeaways from this work include, first of all, that our teaching spaces across the 3 institutions that will come together to form Vermont State University have an average utilization of 26% during the regular workday, Monday through Friday. None of the 5 campuses have a space utilization of greater than 32%. And that's largely what you're seeing on the slide here. Second, as a system, we underspend the amount necessary to maintain our building envelope and mechanical systems by approximately $7 million annually. Third, our deferred maintenance per square foot is rapidly increasing. And finally, for the VSC, the average grade for technology in our teaching spaces is a D. Our multidisciplinary and cross-functional facilities planning team has developed a series of design principles that will move the Vermont State Colleges forward to a stronger physical footing to make sure that we downsize so we match the numbers of students that we have on campuses. As we move forward, our decisions will continue to be made using data and financial analysis that will support our need for financial sustainability while meeting the needs of Vermont learners.
Chancellor?
Yes.
Before you move on from that last slide,
Yes.
I'm wondering a couple of things. First of all, at UVM, they did a similar study, I want to say 10, 12 years ago, and they went to a sort of algorithmic formula for where to place different instructors in different classes, as opposed to the system that they had in place. They weren't thinking about, for instance, taking down buildings. Is it still, and especially building on this, is it still the thought pattern to think about either leasing out or raising buildings at any of the campuses?
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that we're thinking about. It's going to be critical that we figure out how to address the size of our physical footprint. It's approximately, we estimate, about 25% larger than it needs to be. We also need to think about investment, because as we move towards this hybrid university concept, we probably need to repurpose and invest in some of the spaces that we have. So that is what this our facilities planning team is looking at. Our preference would really be to for us not to continue to have those properties on our books, so to speak. So our preference would be if there was a way to, offload the buildings. So in other words, prefer for someone else to take them over rather than for us to be the landlord of buildings, where we'd still have a lot of those costs associated with them. But we're certainly looking at that. It's going to be key, I think, for us to address the structural deficit, is to make sure that we address the physical infrastructure that we have.
Yeah, and then a last question on that is, I I remember in the enabling statute for the state colleges, certain decisions about property sale, for instance, rest with the legislature. We had talked originally, a couple of years ago now, about redoing that statute to give you more flexibility. I'm not sure exactly what the timeline is for these decisions about lease, sale, or destruction, but do you need changes in the underlying statute sooner rather than later, or can it wait?
Well, there was a change that went into effect, and it was really to remind us that we had to follow the procedures that were in a separate part of the statutes. So we do have, there are a couple of pieces that are critical. So one is any proposal to get rid of sort of core campus facilities has to go through the Treasury, the State Treasurer's Office. The other piece is we would have to work out what pieces of property have, so that's to do with capital expenditures, but then the other piece is also what pieces of property have been used as collateral for bonds. So I'm not sure legislatively that there's much you can do to help us right now. If we think of something, I'll be more than happy to share that with you. But I think the bottom line is there are a lot of hoops we have to jump through, but I'm not sure they're ones that the legislature could necessarily fix for us. I mean, they're ones that we just have to work through because there are other legal issues associated with them.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Senator Starr has a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Chancellor, if you flip the page over and you see where you have only 3,406 students at the three universities, why wouldn't it be better to put a little more money into recruitment and get more students to participate, and then the utilization, I would think, would pick up. And because we've got to be missing a lot of students. They're going either somewhere else or they aren't going on at all. And with our type of an investment in our state colleges, we ought to be maximizing, our student needs and get more students to come.
Yeah, you're absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say you're absolutely right that yes, we do want to attract as many students as we can to come in. We have to be realistic about what the likelihood is of us significantly increasing our headcount, given the demographic challenges we face in Vermont. There simply aren't that as many students graduating from high school. I think through the workforce development initiatives, the scholarships that were provided for this fiscal year, bringing down the cost of attendance, I think will be enormously helpful. We've seen that with some of the workforce initiatives that were sponsored by the legislature last year and this year. So certainly we absolutely are going to be trying to recruit students, both Vermonters and from outside of Vermont, by really building, advertising and marketing our really strong programs that we have to become attractive to external students. But I think we also have to be realistic. I mean, there's a lot of colleges that have closed in Vermont where their plan was if we could just get more students in, we'd solve our problems. So I do think we have to be thoughtful about how we go about it. The other piece is that a lot of the sort of future students or potential students that we hope to reach out to, many of them are adult learners that are looking to reskill and upskill. So they're going to be part-time students or commuting students. They're not going to be living in our residential facilities. So it's the piece that's the big difference is the number of traditional sort of residential students living on campus. That's the number that's really going down. That's challenging to plan to rebuild. Again, it's a very, very ruthlessly competitive market in higher education. And one of the biggest challenges we have had is the high cost of tuition that we have. So again, we're really happy we're able to freeze tuition for next year, but ideally we want to get to a place where we can actually be lowering tuition because that will also attract more students in.
Other questions? Otherwise, obviously with the federal money, we've infused quite a lot for upskilling and so forth, but that's kind of a time-limited slug of students coming in for the particular courses and so forth. So your longer-term plan has got to really think about what is that realistic enrollment and how that system downsizes or right sizes, whatever you want to call it, to the realities of the demographics. So
In business, if you've got equipment sitting around idle, you get your butt in gear and go find more work somewhere and keep that equipment busy yeah, I never had a problem, even though companies moved out of Vermont. I never had a problem finding new customers and keeping everything busy. I mean, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but somebody said there was like 5 students in the ag program at BTC. Well,
which either means you got to get more students, or that's a course that no longer has relevance to today's work.
no,
You know.
going to UNH in New York and anyway.
Yeah, well,
If I may, Senator Kitchell and Senator Starr, one of the key areas for growth opportunity for us, as identified by the Select Committee, is the non-traditional student market. And so a lot of the scholarships that were funded by the state were targeted to that demographic, and we saw a lot of uptake in that population. There are 2 projects that I'm currently working on outside of my legislative work. One is with an apprenticeship program, and one is with our nursing program to find better pathways and onboarding opportunities for students to pull non-traditional students into those programs. And some of it is a factor of tailoring our program to both employer and student needs, depending on if that student is a more traditional 18 to 24-year-old four-year college student, or if that student is a non-traditional learner. Some of it is ensuring that folks know about our programs, know how to access our programs, and that our programs are affordable, as Chancellor Zadatny referenced. But we do pay very close attention to all of these things as we are making these decisions and as we are considering all of these things. But I did want to make you aware that we are thinking a lot about that population and a lot about the percentage of high school students in Vermont that don't go on to college, the demographic challenges that face our K through 12 population that then follow into the higher ed and continuing education sector. And so we're thinking a lot about those pathways, how to strengthen those pathways, what opportunities or lessons can be learned from the last several years of being in the pandemic. And it's meant that some of our programs are pivoting, some of them are shifting to better meet the state's and the learners in the state's needs. And that means that we have to shift and pivot and think about different audiences and different recruitment tools as well.
Senator Wesson.
So since you talk about non-traditional students, and a lot of non-traditional students are taking online classes, and the competition, as we know, is places like Southern New Hampshire University. Can you talk a little bit about what we're doing in that area to make ourselves competitive?
Yeah, so we're looking at really building on some of the things we've already been doing with hybrid courses. So for example, we already have faculty both at Castleton and at Johnson in history, in business, mathematics, political science that are teaching courses in person on the campus, but also then by telepresence having students participate from the other campus. So it means that they can teach more students, and it also provides greater access for students. So the students at the other institution would otherwise not have access to those courses. So by being able to participate remotely, they get access to more courses. So really looking to build on that. Again, our nursing program has been decentralized for a long time. That's the model that we have. So we have some experience on doing that. We're not looking to be what you might think of as like a Zoom school or just everything's online. I mean, the goal here is to really build strong connections with the students, but then also to deliver programming in a way that's accessible for as many students as possible. So really meeting students where they're at. The other piece I mentioned was in terms of student support services. So for example, things like financial aid, often students and parents might have a question in the middle of the night, and they would prefer to be able to check online and, sort of self-service, see what, find answers, doing things that way. So really trying to make sure we've got a full complement of ways to reach and support students. So it's in person, but also through these other mechanisms, through the technology that we have now. So really building on what we've learned from the pandemic. So the goal is, I mean, again, we wouldn't be looking at doing enormous classes or impersonal classes, but really maintaining those close personal relationships that our faculty and staff have with our students as we move forward.
Other questions? Otherwise, we keep going. Just checking. Our clock is now covered by the screen, so I don't know how. Oh, 2:13. Okay, we'll keep going. So this gives us quite a bit of data, but I'm thinking we might need to skip some of the slides or more to get into the money.
Sure. If you'd like, Act 74 has certain reporting requirements, and we call them leading indicators. And so these are slides 8 through, just scrolling for a minute here, 8 through 22. And we could skip those and go straight to slide 23. It should be indicated on the bottom center of the slide. And it's titled Budget Goals for FY23.
Okay. Yeah, we've got it. The page number is kind of in the bottom bar.
So would you like me to go ahead?
Yes, if you would, please.
Excellent. So as required by Act 74, the Vermont State Colleges is actively targeting a structural deficit reduction in its expenses equivalent to $5 million for the next fiscal year. And this is very difficult work that has to be addressed really carefully and strategically so as to maintain the quality of our programs and student offerings. Our current budget proposals reflect a $3.5 million reduction in personnel expenses, which will come through the difficult work of our transformation and consolidation efforts, as well as about $1.5 million in supplies, services, and travel. And simultaneously, we'll be seeking to address some of the underfunded capital infrastructure needs of the Vermont State Colleges, such as our technology, deferred maintenance equipment, and related activities. Additional requirements in Act 74 include that the Vermont State Colleges must adhere to all of our board policies, and that the Chancellor shall establish policies and procedures that implement the transformation plan. The board policies are currently in effect and they are being adhered to. There are a couple of exceptions. There was one policy that was superseded by a collective bargaining agreement, a couple of financial policies that have been formally suspended by the board in whole or in part through this budgeting cycle, and a debt service policy that our board has waived through the beginning of FY25. The board will be asked to take action on several policies at its upcoming meeting this coming Saturday. And in addition, our various transformation teams are reviewing all of the board policies that are specific to their areas of expertise as part of their transformation work. As reported on our financial statement issued to the state in October and reported to the Board of Trustees, the VSC provides a detailed profit and loss, and you'll find that statement in your supplementary materials. Additionally, our financial statements and board materials are publicly available on the VSC website, and we can certainly provide you access to those if you'd like. We acknowledge that FY23 will be extremely challenging for the state and that the legislature must make many difficult choices as you prepare the budget. We appreciate the incredible support we've received from the state over the last several years, and we're really looking forward to continuing to work in partnership on our transformation. We have for you today a budget request that consists of the base appropriation, the select committee's recommended increase to the base appropriation, and the bridge funding necessary to allow the Vermont State Colleges to meaningfully and thoughtfully reduce its structural deficit in a way that preserves all 5 of our primary campuses as centers of educational excellence. At the recommendation of the Select Committee, the VSC base appropriation was increased by the state to $35.5 million for FY22 from $30.5 million last year. And we are incredibly grateful for the support. And we've worked really hard to ensure that we're using these state resources wisely. Guided by the financial projections set forth by the Select Committee's report, we know that the Vermont State Colleges will need an additional $12.5 million to meet the needed base appropriation increase over the next 4 years. And last year, we came to you and proposed increasing the base appropriation to $48 million by FY25, as shown here on this slide. Under this initial proposal, the amount of bridge funding necessary to support the Vermont State Colleges during this period varied by year, with a total bridge fund of $46.4 million needed between FY23 and FY26. I note here that the bridge for FY24 increases from $14.9 million to $16.5 million, despite the Vermont State College's continued reduction in its structural deficit. And this is due to the use of $10 million in higher education emergency relief funds in FY23 that will not be available to us in FY24. The Vermont State Colleges proposes accelerating the base appropriation increase to $48 million in FY23 to alleviate pressure on future increases. This would allow the legislature to focus on level funding the base appropriation for the Vermont State Colleges through FY27. Accelerating the increase to the base reduces the overall amount of bridge funding necessary between FY23 and FY26 from $46.4 to $36.4 million, as the increased base funding in FY23 and FY24 will directly offset the amount of bridge funding necessary. As requested by the House, we present you with 2 options for providing the funding necessary to support ongoing operations and continued transformation. Option 1 increases the base appropriation to $48 million beginning FY23 and requires bridge funding of $7.4 million. Option 2 moves the base increase to $40.5 million in FY23 and requires $14.9 million in bridge funding. The governor's budget recommended a $5 million increase in the base appropriation for the Vermont State Colleges in FY23. Unfortunately, this amount falls short of what the Vermont State College really needs by about $14.9 million. To balance next year's budget, the Vermont State College really does need an additional $20 million over and above its FY22 base appropriation to fund ongoing operations and make sure that we transform meaningfully and sustainably. Recognizing the state's unprecedented availability of one-time funds, the uncertainty of funding availability in the future, and the 4-year plan to address our structural deficit, we are also requesting that the full amount for bridge funding for the next 4 years, $36.4 million, inclusive of FY23, be set aside this year. This will enable us to seek only to maintain our new base appropriation and fund any new workforce development initiatives in future years when the state's fiscal picture may be less bright. We fully acknowledge that this is the most difficult funding to provide, but it is some of the most essential, as it allows us to honor the recommendations set forth in the Select Committee's report and adopted by the Vermont State College's Board of Trustees, namely to maintain our campus locations, support our local communities, transform meaningfully, strategically, and intentionally, keep key faculty and staff employed, and enable us to continue to deliver the high quality and relevant programs that meet the workforce needs of the state. Additionally, the investment would address the very real fears and uncertainty in our campus communities regarding college closures by reassuring our students, alumni, community leaders, and other influencers, such as school counselors, that the Vermont State College system institutions are well supported by the state and are here to stay. Alternatively, should you prefer to go with option 2, we request setting aside $46.4 million inclusive of FY23 to provide bridge funding for the remaining 4 years. In total, we request $55.4 million for FY23, $48 million of this in general fund, and $7.4 million as the one-time bridge funding to be used in FY23. Additionally, we request the bridge funding for FY24 to 26 be set aside this year, a total of $29 million for structural deficit support in the coming years. So we really want to thank you for all of the incredible support that you've shown the Vermont State Colleges over these past 2 years. Your investments in our institutions, our students, and our transformation work have been really essential and truly vital.
Senator Burris.
I know that the House hasn't closed out your budget yet, but do you have a sense of where they're headed in terms of your options?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
I'll answer that. And the answer is we really don't know. They're holding our budget open, and we believe we might be one of the last pieces closed.
I see. Okay, thank you.
I imagine it hasn't been closed because they're having a lot of gaps to fill. The ARPA requests are now at least 60 million more than available. And of course, the general fund is oversubscribed as well. So I think they're just having to make the tough decisions to get to where they are. The other thing that's happening here is committees are coming in with bills for additional spending to compete with what's already there to compete with. So I think the House Appropriations Committee had close to 30 bills carrying money that their other committees had handed them.
And they have tax credits.
And their tax credits. So I think they're not closed, and so I would agree with you, Catherine. It's still what they have to work with, and frankly, we're kind of in the same boat. Seems like every bill has got at least a $3 million price tag attached. So we're gonna. Everybody thinks that there's so much money, but in reality, it's really going very quickly. So we'll wait and see how they are able to close the budget and exactly what their decisions are. If you were taking what the governor proposed, if that were the end, can you just tell us that in your view, what would be the impact of that?
You mean if we just received the $5 million as a base increase?
Well, is that what the governor proposed?
That is what the governor proposed for us, right? So I think as Sharon just explained, it would leave us about just under $15 million below where we really need to be. So again, I mean, the benefit of what was laid out in the Select Committee report was this multi-year transformation process. So the goal being, that we can transform in a thoughtful and a meaningful way. The challenge, if we don't have the funding, is then you have to make very short-term, non-strategic decisions, which certainly is not ideal. We certainly would like to be able to continue. We've made really solid progress on the transformation. We're moving forward in a really productive way. Obviously change is incredibly hard, but I do feel we're in a very positive place right now with our different communities understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it. So we really would like to be able to continue on the path that we're on, that was laid out for us by the Select Committee and was adopted by our board.
I can certainly appreciate that. I think other people are listening to this. It's important that obviously you made this request to the administration. And you got $5 million. And that's a very significant gap compared to what you're telling us is needed. It's that what was included in sort of that financial plan toward stabilization. And so the request was considered by the administration, but not accepted. I would assume that you made that request consistent with the plan and the board's decision.
We did. We made the same request to the administration that we've made to you and to the House. Yeah.
All right. I just wanted to put that on record because obviously what the administration did relative to the stabilization of our state college system and the emphasis on what it means in terms of the economy and workforce development is pretty important. And so it's I guess it's a difficult position. We obviously have a big commitment to the state college system, but how you fared in the budget as it was proposed to us is somewhat disappointing compared to the work and the thought that was necessary to really stabilize and sustain this important part of our higher education system. So that's my only point. It's not a reflection on you. It wasn't because you failed to say, oops, we just discovered it. It's a matter of the budget as we received it and reflective of the priorities that are there, because money ultimately reflects priorities. So Senator Baruth.
We passed over it pretty quickly, but on your $5 million structural reduction for this year, you had 3.5 in personnel.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, is that attrition? Is it, are we into any sort of job cuts that, part of I guess part of the selling point of the transformation process was that it preserved the campuses, preserved the jobs at those campuses. What does that 3.5 million in personnel reduction look like?
Yeah, I'm very proud of the fact that we have not actually laid anybody off for the past 2 years. A lot of the shift has come through attrition, which again, that is burdensome on the remaining employees when people leave, but we have tried to be very strategic in filling positions and making, not just blindly replacing people that leave, but really thinking through how can we better utilize that position as we move forward. But I will let Sharon, is the money person, I will let her weigh in too on this.
Absolutely. So I, as the Chancellor noted, the changes up to this point have not included any reductions in personnel in active positions, but rather the repurposing or realignment of existing positions, perhaps not filling certain positions, addressing through attrition, really consolidating individual work. We do anticipate, though, that as we move forward, we will have senior leadership changes that will occur in the coming months. As the Chancellor noted earlier, we do have several candidates coming to visit our campus locations in the next 2 weeks. Ultimately, we're anticipating that new president will be hired to start this summer, and with that comes some senior leadership changes. And we've anticipated that throughout this process. But for the large part, for what we're looking at right now, we are looking at making changes strategically based on existing formats and positions as we look to really restructure, consolidate, and streamline the work that we're looking at. Really being able to take advantage of the work across multiple institutions and really see where there's some opportunities to be able to share resources. As we look at retirements, for example, by looking across the organization, we're able to actually better fill those responsibilities by looking at resources who are already well-trained and well-adjusted to the organization.
So one example is that, we had changes in our libraries. And so we already had a well-functioning library system between the Community College of Vermont and Vermont Technical College. So Castleton University and Northern Vermont University said, well, now seems the time that we should develop a system library. So, we're going down that path. We now have a system director of libraries. So again, as people have left, we've tried to really rethink and repurpose what we're doing. And is there a more efficient way to do it moving forward without necessarily having to replace everybody that leaves? But then, we are trying to be as mindful as we can of the stress that does put on the folks that are left behind.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, there's more discussion to be had, and I know Senator Baruth, and then once we get the budget as passed by the House, then we'll have a chance to see exactly what action they took relative to your additional requests. So appreciate your presentation, and obviously we'll be following up. So thank you. No further questions, committee? Just want to, at this point? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're taking up another bill at this point. It's S-285.
Hey, how are you? Is that my bill?
Yeah.
I thought I found it. Sorry.
Yeah.
He's short on that. Well, the plan always called for the first three years drops down significantly. But I mean, basically what they're saying is just give it to us all now and we will come to you.
So Senator Lyons, this is your result of your work with after our HROC committee meeting, and now I guess the title needs to be changed, right?
It is at the end.
It is, because so effective date, no, it's that changed. All right, so we have with us Senator Lyons, who is here on S-285. And although the bill, as it's entitled, as introduced, is a strike ball and really is dealing with how do we move to value-based payment and probably global budgeting, and taking some of the recommendations, I guess, that we had from not only the board, but our own healthcare consultant. It's being reflected in this bill. And so we also have Jen Carby here as well. So if you would like to present the bill to us.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So we've changed the title, which is on the last page. So now it's an act relating to healthcare reform initiatives, data collection, and access to home and community-based services. And not all of the bill has appropriations in it, but they're all more or less linked together. As you said, this bill derives both from HROC, a set of consultants that we've had over time, including most recently Donna Kinzer. And for the record, I'm Senator Ginny Lyons, who has been extremely helpful in working with our committee. So she came into committee to talk with us as we developed the bill. We also had a healthcare affordability and accessibility task force that met over the summer. And the recommendations from that task force report are also included. And they very much link in with the work that we had from Donna Kinzer. So it's and then as you said, and as you all know, the Green Mountain Care Board has been looking at how to provide for hospital sustainability. And we know that even before the pandemic, hospitals were failing. We saw what happened to Springfield Hospital, and we've seen other hospitals getting in the red or very close to the red. The pandemic, fortunately, we had some stabilization funds that were able to keep hospitals. But the use of a new system for payment to hospitals for services seems to be critically important for providing financial sustainability. So what you are looking at in section 1 is the development by the Green Mountain Care Board. This is where there's a $1.4 million appropriations request for value-based payment design. So this is not a simple task, and it will require some consultants to help the Green Mountain Care Board to develop a regulatory, within the regulatory process, a system for, we can call them value-based payments, alternative payment model, global payments ultimately from all payers to Vermont hospitals. That's a big task, and then their initial report on how the funds are being used for consultants and initial planning process would come to ATROC on November 1st, 2022, and then a final report in January 2023. The second section of the bill is an appropriation of $2.5 million. And this is part and parcel with looking at hospital sustainability. Then it's critically important to understand where the hospitals are dividing their patients, what's the geographic area, what are the needs that are going into the hospital, who's being treated and what type of treatment is taking place. And that all, so the $2.5 million here is for a fairly robust community engagement process that includes both the Green Mountain Care Board and the Agency of Human Services to develop a system of going out to the community, going out to providers, going out to understand what is needed within our delivery system itself, and then what requirements, what we would be looking at for any transformation in our care delivery system.
It looks like this community engagement isn't a general conversation. It's very focused in terms of moving toward a different payment structure.
Yes.
So I mean, I have to tell you, we have just about every bill has the engaging the community.
Of course it does.
And exactly what that means and toward what end has different meanings depending on how it's used. I think
so, and within this, then, as we
you're
know,
talking about that the people are going out and they have expertise. If I'm reading in this, in healthcare system design, to assist the board to a delivery system. I really struggle, Senator Lyons. We know that everybody said healthcare is costing too much. People are paying too much. And yet on the other end, people are saying, providers are saying, we're not getting enough to make us stable. So the question becomes one of, well, where is the money going? And
Being done.
And how is it being spent? And because it seems like there's a certain a dissonance between there's a lot of money going in, and then we're saying we have provider part of the system that is struggling to survive or is on the brink of bankruptcy. So, and I know this will be more predictability and so forth. So, is this the process that has been used in other states? I know that Donna was in Maryland and has a lot of
Maryland
experience
is
with
probably in the forefront of some of this. Pennsylvania has also done some of it. Rhode Island has been a slightly different way in terms of looking at cost control regulation. So the bill that you have before us does what you're talking about. It puts a system in place to analyze what the needs are within the community, as well as looking at alternative payment models. So when we say that, everybody sort of glazes over, but we know that fee for service, paying every time you go into a hospital or a provider is very expensive. And we also know that particularly during the pandemic, We've seen alternative payment per patient per month, or perhaps we could look at the FQHCs where they have what's known as a PPS. And we understand that those payments do two things. One, they sustain the provider by ensuring that there's some sustainable funding. And then they provide for the care that's needed in a cost-effective way. So this will allow for that kind of analysis, both by Green Mountain Care Board and within the Agency of Human Services, within the Department of Healthcare Reform being part of the lead in that area.
The Green Mountain Care Board, that's not part of their job anyways, to try to figure this all out, and have meetings and
Engage the public.
community meetings, and, I mean, it's there, I've been to 2 in Newport for our area, the Green Mountain Care Board had, which wanted, you know, we had a discussion about what are your needs and who's paying and that whole 9 yards, right, with Green Mountain Care Board.
I'm sure that they do, but they don't have the same expertise that a design systems transformation design consultant would have. They absolutely need to have that support. And then this is slightly different, but there'll be some coordinated effort at bringing all providers together. And then the hospitals will be included in this, our community services will be included in this, to try to understand what role our DAs, our SSAs, our mental health substance use disorder providers are build into a new program. So the transformation will be to link in with a common payment system at the primary care level, the community service level, and then for hospitals as well, because we know hospitals have a big chunk of the healthcare money. So this is an opportunity for a comprehensive transformation of the system that we have.
So let me ask, we have talked about getting rid of fee for service for, I don't know how long, a decade. And we all acknowledge that that's not a good way to provide care. It creates perverse incentives. We all know the argument why we need to move away from it. When we get done here, will we actually have the ability to get into global payments and global budgeting, which everyone says is really needed, because you can ratchet down on reimbursement, it'll pop out on utilization. So you really have to look at the system as a whole. The other problem, of course, is maldistribution in terms of where money is spent. And so we're chronically underfunding mental health. On the other hand, hospitals are saying they're right on the edge. And then we're talking about how to get to that sort of countdown to nirvana, which is global budgeting and a replacement for fee for service. So once we get done this work, where will we be relative to our goal?
I would hope that we would have a plan to bring us to a place where we can implement global budgeting. And I'm sure there will be a requirement for some kind of legislative action. There always is. And then there will be an opportunity for transformation of the system in a way that will also require some courage on the part of legislature and on the part of the board. So this is not a simple task, and there will be a lot of people who are unhappy, but given the way we put this together, and we've had all parties come together with this, the hospitals, our Agency of Human Services, and our community services, and our Green Mountain Care Board and others, really see this as an opportunity to get to, when it's over, global budgeting for hospitals and potentially an alternative payment model through the system. And you'll notice in here, there's also that the that we'll have to go through a process with CMMI to get there. And part of this is, how do we know we're going to make an improvement in the system? So one of the goals is to have quality outcomes improvement. And the only way we can do that is by analyzing clinical data. And right now, both our payment model, what we have for payment in this state is all over the place. You know, you go to one hospital, you pay a certain amount, you go to another one, you pay a different amount. And you go to one set of providers, you pay one amount, and so on. So one of the things that will be captured here at the end is a common payment system. There may continue to be differentials, but at least they'll be based on some kind of actuarial analysis. Then the second part of this is the quality piece. Okay, what are you paying for? And so part of the bill has an integration of our healthcare IT, health information that is clinical data being merged in with the claims data that we get in VCures that you know is now in the Green Mountain Care Board. So by putting those things together, we'll be able to look at what is the most effective clinical treatment for a certain type of mental health disorder, or as we have in our blueprint system now, for diabetes or for cardiovascular disease, so that we'll be able to influence clinical outcomes by influencing care for patients. So will that happen the day after the report comes in? No, but what we will have is we'll have an integrated system of data that allows for those determinations to be made and for folks to work together. The FQHCs currently have a system where they integrate social determinants of health, and we're also wanting to put that into the mix as well, so that we can help people within the primary care environment.
Alice, you had a question. So I'm just wondering, is there another state that has at least parts of this?
Oh, yeah, Maryland.
Maryland, just Maryland? Is that the
No,
only?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, those are the only two?
No, I think there are more.
Yeah, there are others. Yeah.
The person that we have come in, that the chair is referencing, Donna Kinzer, came from Maryland, and she was, she's the director of their hospital.
She's amazing.
And so, a lot of what you're seeing here is what she's recommended you have to do for work to get to where Maryland is, and they've been able to stabilize and, control hospital costs. It's just, we've had a lot of discussion about it. I don't know how many years of talking about it.
Exactly.
And so she was recommended by Millbank, who actually funded her to, well, she didn't collect any money. She didn't ask for any money. She refused compensation for her visit. So that's, so she does have, she has direct.
She's very tough.
She has direct administrative experience. She's not, theoretical. She has actually been head of the Maryland system.
Sorry. So I thought we were having some success with the FQHCs, and they're tracking a lot of data. And is that considered successful?
SQHCs are very successful. They're also better funded because they're federal, so, but some of what they do can be modeled and utilize it. They're also very interested in this process and wanted to be included.
They don't wreck their process.
Nothing like their
Well, they're the major provider of primary care in the state.
That's the difference. Their primary care and hospitals are a different kettle of fish.
We have a blueprint.
Yeah.
So CenterStar and then
Yeah, if we went to a global payment type thing, I'm sure we aren't gonna cut the payments down to the lower end. They would automatically, I bet, float toward the upper end. And, this controlled cost and controlled income doesn't usually work. Free enterprise, I think, works probably as well as any. But I went to our annual hospital meeting. They spent the bulk of their evening talking about a 40 or $50 million addition. I mean, there was no talk about trying to figure out a way to keep costs down or, I mean, I don't
Well, the way
I
they,
don't know. You
the
know,
way they pay for
Burlington,
that addition is probably to
they're
try to hire an
talking big
orthopedist and
additions.
expand their patient load, which is absolutely the worst thing in terms of overall cost of the system. But that's how they would have to support an expansion plan.
Yeah, but you take a schoolhouse, you can build the most beautiful schoolhouse in the world. And if you don't have the right people in that building teaching those children, they aren't gonna learn one bit more or better than if you left them in the old schoolhouse. And we never seem to talk about, you know, how the organization is working, but we'll talk about how much the CEO is getting paid, which is, you know, a little bit out of line. And things like that, but nobody ever does anything about it. You go to their board of trustees meeting and sit there as a spectator and take it all in. Hell, they give raises here, raises there. They don't talk about how we're gonna fix the costs. So you can throw all the money in the world at this unless you change the system somehow.
They are, that's what's designed to do is change the paradigm that you're talking about, Senator Star.
Both of these do that.
And so if
The
you're,
hospitals have been, the hospitals were petrified when we took this up. I just will let you know. And, but we have tried to work with them to help them understand that this will be important to hospital financial health because so many of them have been in the red.
And why shouldn't they be if they're making additions and doing the things that I just talked about without some good thought?
I would think that the people that would be most concerned about this are not the hospitals that you're talking, the community-based hospitals that you're talking about, because most of them have the lowest rates and they aren't wanting to provide all the services in the world. They're wanting to concentrate on what their community needs. So this, I would think, would throw a different eye on instead of them spending as much time looking at the Copley budget as they look at the budget at the medical center. It will be in the overall, how does everybody's rates fit in what they're doing, other than, you know, zeroing in on what each individual hospital is doing now, which it doesn't get us that far.
But if you run at a lower cost, you get more patients.
I just, can I shift a little?
wait, unless Senator Starr has any further comment about, so how we see hospitals operating right now, which is, I think, what he's reflecting on, in terms of.
They're all over the place.
Yeah, well, in terms of volume, in terms of charges, in terms of staffing, et cetera. It's kind of the Wild West, I guess. Senators.
I agree with that. It is the Wild West. So in section 8, when we talk about.
Where are you?
Section 8.
Section 8 on page 13.
Page 13.
It's called, it's having Dale put together the.
Oh, this, yeah, okay.
Can you talk a little bit about this? And I know you've done some other work in some area and where you're headed with this. Because I've gone through somewhat of the Dale budget this year. And we're facing the 3% that the governor put in. And I have all of these designated agencies doing all the work. And I have Dale as a department unable to even tell me what the average salaries are for the designated agencies. It's hard for me to figure what the 3% is doing. What's envisioned here in what direction in the other work that you've done? Do you see?
So this one is originally our consultant from the Affordable Accessible Healthcare Task Force recommended an expansion into of the moderate needs group. And we, as we looked at it, we realized that that was a heavier lift. We would need more data, and we can't do that. But there were some concerns that we had about that expansion. So this is really to have Dale, along with others, look at, as you can see, a list of things here to the types of services that are needed for many older Vermonters, the opportunities to extend services, how can they extend services, if at all, and they're very, as you know, our Agency of Human Services is very resource compromised. They don't have all the resources that they need, and Dale is part of that. And then how to set clinical and financial eligibility criteria and so on, should that expansion take place. So this is really a study and analysis. It's less than what we had wanted to do initially, but it's probably more realistic for what the department can do.
I just say to you, I'm looking at residential care homes, I'm looking at a lot of
What
the,
you're saying is we're underfunding what we already have.
we're underfunding what we already have, but the problem is it's hard to quantify that underfunding because I can't even get, when I say, what's the average wages that they're paying, they can't, Gail can't even give me the numbers. And so I don't know how to compare what a 3% increase is versus what their major expenses and salary are. And I can't do it. And in knowing, as you're talking about moderate needs group, I'm not sure what moderate needs is anymore. Because a lot of the residential care homes, people are aging in that place and they're moving into services that look more like nursing home, because people get there when they're healthier and then they stay longer and they're using the wraparound services through Choices for Care to get there. So I'm not even sure now when you leave moderate and move into high needs. So I'm struggling with.
The moderate needs group right now is about 400 or 500 people.
Yeah.
And so to expand to that number of people, I forget the exact number, I don't have it with me, but it was money.
Yeah.
And you're right, it was money, and it was also people providing services. And which is why we pulled back from it. But there are also some issues here that need some attention for people. We're going to see more and more people at home, and our demographic is getting older and older. Look at us. So
Yeah, and if you're in a residential care
Who's
home,
gonna take care of us?
I'm not being critical of this. I'm just.
I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. It would be, the healthcare committee would be very happy to look at this a little bit further after we get all our deals done, but we're glad to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad you're looking at it. I'm just
We have a
relaying some of my
long-term care
frustration.
bill, H-153, in our committee that is looking at long-term care services and how to expand Medicaid support. And it's,
What this really is begging, people are saying that there's costs attached and they would like to have the costs socialized.
yeah,
And that costs money.
yes.
And I think one of the things that we're really struggling with here is what do we have in place and how adequately are we funding it? So our whole Choices for Care system, regardless of whether we can get the level of data that Senator Westman would like, we know has been chronically underfunded.
Yeah.
And so This is saying, well, we would like to serve more people and put greater stress on a delivery system that's already very fragile because of the level of funding. So that's the dilemma
That's the
here.
rock in the hard place.
And so it's, and of course, the moderate needs came in under the waiver, under the choices for care waiver, with if you invest or provide these services, then you can preclude nursing home care. And residential care homes are, people are aging in place and they're getting a higher level of care. So we are hit with the VNAs that provide essential services. Our personal care providers are, the negotiated wage was like $12 and something, a little shy of $13 an hour. And that's critical for people to be in their homes. So I understand why people are saying we would like to have a program that provides this for us so we can preserve our own money here and not spend down. Or I would like to have more care provided. It's going to come right up against the buzzsaw of what do we have for financial capacity.
Think of it this way, if and when we convert to an alternative payment model, and we are also including in this an evaluation of community services, long-term care, and so on, that I know it sounds impossible, but there's an opportunity for us to look at that analysis and then understand that we are moving in the right direction. So moving in the right direction for covering the people who need it and paying the providers who also need it. So it's, I understand exactly what you're saying. This is a big discussion going on. This has been going on for a long time, but also remember, if we plug one hole in the dike, another one's going to show up. So at some point we have to repair the dam, and we're hoping that we can do that overall in the bill. That's.
Well, I don't quarrel with the goals. I'm just saying how much government can take on or relative to other payers, or how we build on this is going to be out there. And I think we're coming to the, we feel so much here where all those areas, shouldn't we be doing more to fund VHCD because we're notwithstanding. Our reach up families, the standard of need is pitiful in terms of the number of thousands of children that we actually know are in abject poverty. And so some of this is here. We feel very troubled by how poorly we're doing in some areas.
That's absolutely, and I don't disagree with it. We've only got 11 adult days in the state. If I ask Dale, what's the average wage by category of people working there? They can't quantify it at all.
Well, they'd have to ask for the reports because Dale doesn't get paid. They're not rate set.
And it's in their budget. So how do I make a judgment on what?
Well, we have them coming in next week, so I'll ask the same question.
Yeah, but if you ask them, they can't tell you. And the question.
Dale can't tell you, but the local ones can tell you.
Yeah, but if I go to each one, because I can tell you what mine does and more stuff, but how do you put together an overall budget for Dale that sends that money, and how do I address their problem?
That's what's troubling us, because we see that in fact we're not going to be able to, and we have expectations that and so partly what this is attempting to do is saying we've got a lot of money in this system, we're not spending it we're not spending it as effective as we could, and if we got into a different payment model, it would help control the costs. However, some of what we're talking about is outside maybe what would be in that payment model, because even in countries that have universal health care, oftentimes long-term care is not part of it.
Yes.
Dental care is not part of it. So I mean, it's only one piece of healthcare.
Yeah.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
And I appreciate the discussion of payments in terms of what this is designed to create. I'm just wondering about the actual appropriations. And I'm wondering how much back of the envelope are the numbers? In other words,
Oh,
there's 1 point.
did Donna help you out?
1.4 and 1.
Or where did the appropriations recommendations?
So in particular, the second one, which is,
Well, I don't think Nolan came up with it.
No, he did not. Which one are you on?
well, the first is 1.4, the second one is 2.5.
Yeah,
And I'm wondering, the 2.5, I'm just remembering one time when we were discussing money for a consultant in ed, and a number came to us, and we asked if they could do it for significantly less. And it happened that the people were in the room and they said, sure, without even considering it. So I'm just wondering, is that something that came to you with?
So how heavily vetted are the numbers in
Yeah.
here?
how the numbers got to us is a good question, and I'm happy to answer it. So the numbers originally came to us from the Green Mountain Care Board, and then as we went through the bill, and I have Nolan's fiscal note, which you probably.
Yeah, we have it right here.
Yeah, okay. So as we went through and looked at what was needed in the bill, we also understood that the Agency of Human Services was going to be doing work, so we took some of the money away from the Green Mountain Care Board and put it into the work that AHS would be doing. I cannot answer the question about whether a consultant would say, I'll do it for less. You know, that's certainly a question for the Green Mountain Care Board.
They'd have to do an the plan would be.
They're gonna do an RFP, and there'll be certain criteria. So we wanna know, we've got someone that's got some experience, not for the global budgeting piece, but for the second part, the transformation piece that you're talking about. A rural state type
I'm
experience.
just wondering if the RFP said 2 million instead of 2.5, would you be
I
able to?
cannot answer that question. I think that is a question to be put to the Green Mountain Care Board and the Agency of Human Services. We deliberately don't know the appropriations in our committee, but we do listen for what the basic needs are. So data gathering and analysis, community engagement, and technical assistance. So we understand that there are needs out there, and having worked with several different consultants and studies over time, you know, I think this is probably not unreasonable.
The board sent us an email memo, and you would have received that in terms of what they were proposing, and they had a $5 million request.
Yeah,
Did that inform any of this bill?
yeah, that's this.
Okay, that's all I'm wondering. So,
That's the total that's here, and we've taken some of it and given it to the Agency of Human Services.
so in essence, it was the analysis, the fiscal analysis from the board that influenced the appropriations. And I think
Yes.
Senator Burr said, where do these numbers come
Yeah.
from? And my question is, was it from that original memo from the board?
I don't know whether it was an original memo, but certainly in discussion.
Whatever.
Yeah, discussion.
But
And
I,
also, you know, and I'm sorry, but also in consultation with the consultants that we talked with, they thought that these, as I recall, and Jan, maybe you can back me up with this, I know that this might be a reasonable request and process. And it certainly would be helpful. I think Donna Kinzer still is available to talk with her about the appropriations piece.
All right.
Yeah.
And you took testimony from her as well?
Oh, yeah, a whole lot. I met with her a couple times with Janet Nolan. We talked about how to.
So did she validate that these numbers were?
I don't know that she validated them, but
I
as
don't
we
think we talked
talked,
to her about the numbers.
we never did talk, okay.
Well, we might
Definitely
just have no
process.
one double check and see
Yeah,
what
well, thanks.
I will send you
response to
an
the-
email.
It could have been Josh Langley.
All right. Other questions, well, we have the bill, we don't, if we want to have that follow up first before we take action, we can do that.
Yeah.
Come on. Thank you very much.
No, but thank you. I sincerely hope that you act on the bill, and, allow it to go forward. It is an opportunity. It's also pretty exciting when you think about it.
That's true, and Senator Sears and I would like to meet with you, and, who, Senator Sears, have you ever heard of him?
The one on the screen up there.
Senator Sears?
Yeah.
And, so.
You need to unmute.
and
The old
Senator-
man down in Bennington.
Yeah, and
I'd
so,
love to meet with Senator Sears.
Senator Sears, and he's gonna be up, in person tomorrow and Friday. And just wondered if perhaps could we find a little time to meet with you? Would you be available at lunch tomorrow?
At what, 1 o'clock? Lunch, sure, I can try, I know I've got a.
Actually, we have another meeting at lunch, Senator
Oh,
Kitchell.
yeah, we do, don't we? I already
Yeah.
set up another one with Jeanette.
Yep.
Okay,
You can double book.
well, how about, we could do either noon or, 8:30 on Friday?
Yeah, 8:30 on Friday.
Yeah, either one, I think 8:30 on Friday is probably the best.
Okay, all right, just thought I would do that while you were here.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, 8:30,
Can I ask you another question? Oh, no, it's a non-question. Let me just make sure that tomorrow. Friday. Friday at 8:30 looks good.
Tomorrow's Thursday.
Thursday,
Tomorrow is Thursday.
yeah, well, that's why, Dick and Jeanette and I have a meeting at noon. That's why he was saying I was already going tomorrow.
Meeting in the hospital tomorrow morning at 7:30.
All
All of them?
see how many are staying in buildings that don't see entryways. You know, they really,
8:30 Friday where?
Right here would be fine. Thank-
I know.
Remember, this is a very small investment for a huge opportunity.
What, 5 million, right? We're 60 million short.
We'll get it over there.
We're on the pensions now.
That would be a murder for sure.
You think they're gonna pension me out or?
Okay, thank you.
Jenny's got a place where I can get that.
Sorry.
You don't do additions down
Don't do what?
to your house.
We don't do what?
Additions.
Additions.
Like you don't
Building
have to
additions.
pay the opening.
Do you want a copy of?
You've been to my hospital.
Yeah, so simple.
And
You just muted yourselves. Did you mute yourselves on purpose? Just talking about me or something?
we muted ourselves just because we were talking about you.
Yeah,
That's what I figured happened.
we shut you off.
I mean, that was got me doing all right.
No, it's got me already generally sent it out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Jen.
So there's my hospital.
You know, and they're doing all right.
Well, that little.
It's like everything, my school's wonderful, but yours is costing too much.
No, I was just saying, Springfield and Mount Scotney like both. And Mount Scotney is actually doing all right right now. I feel like they could be doing better.
Well, probably because they have budget control. So maybe that's it. They could be doing better if they didn't.
Well, I
No,
mean,
they have some areas where, they really worked hard to do okay. And
All right, so, committee, this is the last item today, and we are on pensions. Well, it's not exactly light. And we have Chris Drew with us.
sure, this is sort of a big upside.
Yeah, and as you know, we left last year with a task force to deal with our pension underfunding. And we have a bill that's come out of government operations that is reflective of an agreement that was reached between the legislative members of that committee. And now we have to get that agreement into a bill and formalize. So we have Chris here, who has been spending most of his time over the summer working with the task force. And then in December, we really got into the numbers and how to put together a proposal that we could start addressing both underfunding of pensions as well as our healthcare benefits. And that was when Stephanie joined the team. And so what we have now is a bill before us, and Chris is going to help go through kind of the high points. We've already touched on it to some extent because we set aside the $50 million when we did the budget adjustment. We didn't appropriate it. We didn't reserve it like the House did, because our plan was to appropriate the money in this bill. But there are other areas that were really important to both the teachers and the state employees, and that was in addition to the annual payment we or the schools pay as employers, that there be sort of what they call the plus payment, which would be helping to buy down the underfunding. So this reflects sort of what was important to them, what was important to us, that the task force had not really gotten into until really December, and that's the healthcare benefits, which never had been pre-funded. And so for the state employees, the underfunding of the healthcare benefits for retirees was actually greater than the pension underfunding. The reverse was true for teachers, because you may remember from prior conversations, we did the pay-go for teachers' benefits out of the corpus of the retirement fund. So, which we did not do for state employees. So that only compounded the underfunding of their pensions. So this gave us an opportunity to really look at those retirement benefits of healthcare and the financial payment as a package, and get ourselves our fiscal house in order, because we actually had implemented a benefit that we really had never addressed how to fund it, and it was defaulting to pay-go all on the general fund. So with that said, this is the product of that agreement. And I know that we have a bit more details to kind of finalize, but at least we've got really the framework here, and I'm going to let Chris kind of go through that with us.
Yeah, before he jumps to start, so could I ask, where the 150 that we set aside last year, where has that been parked, and how much of a return did we get from that? Or was it real money?
Yeah, it was 150 million. And
Treasurer, it was just parked in the general fund as an account. All the, I don't think we accrued any specific amount to that reserve that we put inside, because everything is on the bottom line of the Treasury. And so if it doesn't get sort of assigned to its respective pieces, it's just stayed there. We can find out from the Treasurer what the hold from July to present date. They can make an estimate if we've got short term, but it's not accruing to that reserve. It's just accruing the internal cash flow of the state.
Short-term pieces like that she makes goes directly to the general fund.
Yeah.
So we didn't make any money on it?
well, we did, but
It's just not accrued to the 200 million. It's accrued to the the regular general fund.
I would also say, Madam Chair, based on the way global markets have been performing since last July, I would say we haven't lost any money either.
More recently. So yes, we ended up last year, and you're right, Bobby, we had 150 in reserve. That was for state employees, OPEB, which was healthcare. We had that pas de deux with our colleagues in the House around teachers' healthcare. And we had said we needed to start pre-funding it, and we had that 13.8 or 9 million. We couldn't come to agreement, so we left it in reserve, which turned out to be very helpful because the 150 and that was there, and the other money. I think we actually had two things. We had the 54.2 was for the healthcare. That was at the end of the year construct, and the 150 was for just pension underfunding. So the 50 that we're adding in this bill here was to go toward teachers, recognizing their higher level of underfunding on the pension side. So we had 3 pots of reserve that helped us come in and put this package together. The 150, the 54.2, or the 52.4, I don't remember.
52.4.
52.4, and then the 13.8 or 9.
And the 13.8 or 9 was the only one really connected with the healthcare for teachers.
No, the 52.4 was
That was state employees.
employees.
Yeah, the 13.
Yes, that's right.
13 is the teachers.
And that was in the ed fund.
That's the seed money.
And then one of the things that we had agreement on with the House is that we would start prepaying out of the ed fund the cost of current teachers' healthcare coverage when they retire. So we finally came to agreement that that was a legitimate education fund expenditure. So having that reserve and then that decision also was critical to this package. So anything else that people remember that we put in? Okay.
I was not happy at the time.
You were not happy?
In the conference committee. But it's going to turn out okay.
It was, and actually it really helped us to have that money available in the way that we did. And then it's because it really came in as part of a full package here. So.
Yeah, we don't really care.
Well, it was difficult.
It was difficult at the time because
Well,
if you were gonna, it was a chance to take a positive step, but I think it moved a lot of people along in their thinking.
well,
So, and now we have Becky Wasserman, who has been spending her evening hours, I imagine, drafting and line from J. Alfred Prufrock, 100 visions and revisions. We must feel like that at this point.
Maybe a little more than 100.
Well, okay. So, Chris, if you want to run through, and then Becky, you're going to just do the high points of what's changed as well.
Sure.
Thank you both.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Chris Root, Joint Fiscal. It's great to be with you all in person here today. I know it's been a little while since we talked about pensions, since we sort of did a preview early on when the session started. But before I dig into the weeds a little bit, I just want to give you a little context of what's happened since January. So the task force report was released with its final recommendations on January 10th. We were scribbling right down to the wire to get the wording of those agreements finalized during the meeting, that final meeting. Immediately afterwards, we pivoted and did a roadshow around some of the money committees, and we came to you all and gave you some slides with the high points. And since then, Senate Government Operations, with the help of Legislative Counsel and with the Treasurer, put together some language that you now see as S286. That bill captures the broad contours of the substance of the agreement. But we knew that there were some.
Should I keep this?
You can, for old time's sake. But that we knew that at the time, for timing reasons, we had some more details to be worked out. So the path forward that that was agreed to was Senate Government Operations would pass out the bill as it reflected the broad contours of the agreement. It would then come over to this committee and allow enough time to work out some of the details about how do we implement this. So that's what Becky and the Treasurer's Office have been working furiously at for the last few weeks, is really trying to make sure that all the nuts and bolts are in place. The I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. We still have some work to do there, but the range of issues that are outstanding is relatively narrow. It's just we are working to get them figured out. Yeah. Having said all that, I think what you will see is a very, very large amendment. That would be a strike-all amendment that I believe the intent is this committee to offer. Just because it's a strike-all amendment doesn't mean you're making crazy changes to the framework. Exactly. One of the issues is, you'll see that this is a 50+ page bill. The pension statutes, as they're currently written, leave a lot to be desired for clarity purposes. So Becky has been working a lot with the treasurer to see, can we rewrite some of the sections to make them a little more coherent and logical and say what they're supposed to say. So that's why you'll see some of the changes that may not look that substantive in the strike-all amendment, but that's why they're there. Let's pivot over real quick to the fiscal note. You are my first audience for seeing this fiscal note that my colleague Stephanie and I worked on. And the goal here is to try to give you all a document that takes this crazy, long, complicated bill and distills it into something that resembles plain English, that you can understand what the current state is and the proposed state is, and how those different factors impact the money. If you take a look at this and if anything is unclear or you have questions, please let us know, because I really want to make sure that we're putting out a document that's going to be useful and clear to everyone. But I'm just going to walk through some of the highlights here, because we're going to be talking about this quite a bit this session, just to refresh your memories and give you a flavor of what all's in the bill and what it does. So some of the highlights are bolded here on page 1. You know, the sort of bottom line up front is this total package would be expected to reduce Vermont's unfunded retirement liabilities by about $2 billion. Billion with a B across all 4 buckets of retirement liabilities. So that would be the state and teacher pension, state and teacher OPEB. OPEB is the subsidized health care for retirees. The bill also contains appropriations that Senator Kitchell mentioned. It contains $200 million of one-time general fund appropriations. And it also contains, and those go to the pension systems for paying down the unfunded liabilities. That money is proposed to be allocated $75 million to the state employees, $125 million to the teachers. The reason why is because the teacher underfunding is significantly larger than the state employee underfunding. The rough ratio is the state pension is about 35% of the unfunded pension liabilities. Teachers is the other 65%. So that's why you see that disproportionate impact. The bill also contains a $13.3 million one-time ed fund appropriation. That $13.3 million would come out of the $14 million you all reserved during the budget process last year to fund the normal cost of the teacher OPEB. But here, that $13.3 million is going to be used to seed pre-funding. So in order to pre-fund these OPEB benefits, you want to start with a little slug of money to protect you from short-term volatility. You don't know what's going to happen with the investment markets. Your claims experience might be a little different. So it's good to start with a little slug of money to begin pre-funding. And this is an amount, this $13.3 million comes from a funding recommendation that the treasurer provided last session. You don't see something similar for the state employee OPEB, because the state employee OPEB already received $52.4 million from the year-end construct last year, which is more than enough to sort of serve this purpose of having a little upfront slug of money to begin pre-funding. So I'm going down through the overview of the legislation and just some highlights here. It's really important to remember and to reiterate no changes to the benefits of current retirees or beneficiaries. I already mentioned the second bullet point about the one-time payments, which would immediately go toward reducing those pension unfunded liabilities. The proposal calls for higher employee contributions for active members of both systems, both the state employee and the teacher systems. And these rates would be phased in over a 3 to 5 year period. The additional money that comes from employee contributions funds a greater share of the normal cost. The normal cost is the actuarial way of talking about the costs that you need to set aside over the course of your working life to make sure that when you retire, there's enough money to fund the future, the retirement benefits you earn. So the normal cost is what we should be paying as long as there's a system that's open and you have active workforce members that are earning a future benefit. But the additional money coming from those employee contributions translates to direct savings from the employer. Because if that money wasn't coming from higher employee contributions, the employer would be paying it by default through the ADAC.
And we're playing catch up from where we didn't.
Going on to page 2, in addition to the higher employee contributions, a key part of the proposal is modifications to the cost of living formula, plus some other changes to the terms of the benefits specific to VSERS Group C and Group D. Group C is law enforcement, Group D is judges. But all combined, these what has been costed out for the task force around these COLA changes, we're looking at an approximate estimated $58 million reduction of the VSERS pension liability, unfunded liability, and $8.7 million reduction of ADAC savings, just on that system. On the teacher side, the COLA modifications are expected to yield about $35 million of unfunded liability reduction and $4.8 million of relative ADAC savings. And the last bullet point here is a key part of this, this package hinges on the state committing to making some ongoing additional payments toward the unfunded liability. Senator Control mentioned this as the plus payment. The way this is envisioned to work is for each system, beginning in 2024, when the actuaries prepare their funding recommendation to the legislature, whatever the actuarially recommended amount is for paying the unfunded liability would have an additional amount added to it. It would begin at $9 million in 2024 per system. By 2026, it would be $15 million per system, and it would remain in place at $15 million until the respective pension system hits 90% funded. Then it goes away. The thought process behind this is you're essentially reinvesting some of the savings that you would realize from some of the changes to the COLA and the higher employee contributions into digging yourself out of the unfunded liability hole a little bit faster. And when you make payments toward the unfunded liability that are above the actuarially recommended amount, that will save you interest costs long-term, and it will lower the amount of your actuarially recommended payments will be in the future. It's kind of like prepaying in advance. And you know, you pay more now to pay less in the future. It's long term, it saves money.
But that 15 million is an annual.
Yeah,
Correct.
Sure.
but I just want to refer you back to page 1 and the second bullet. $50 million. That we are talking about. That's why it's important to put it in. In other words, those payments that we're making reduce the amortized liability payment starting, I think, in 2 years.
It's 2 years.
So, and that would, as mentioned, that would save 19.5 across the two systems. So that freed up, so what you, right, it allowed it to be shifted over to fund the plus on the ADAC.
Yeah, that's pretty good claim.
You think so?
Yeah.
I thought so.
If you can get somebody on pay bill. Yeah.
Well, that was the advantage of taking this one-time money, because it really does free up money that you can use. But the healthcare benefit, we're still having to put some money in.
Any estimate on how long it would take to reach the 90% cost?
The actuaries, I have numbers in here somewhere that, based on the latest actuarial evaluation, I believe it's not going to happen until the mid-2030s.
20, is it 36?
It is 2034 for VSERS and 2036 for the teachers.
Where's that?
So as long as the 15 million keeps coming.
It would- Senator Wilson, that's on page 7.
The 15 would probably bring that up a little.
What,
Yeah.
accelerate those years.
Yeah.
We might live to see it, Bobby. Let's see.
That'd be a miracle. I
Well,
don't think I'd want them.
Probably be at a nursing home, maybe. All right.
So I'm just gonna gloss through a couple other quick things here on page 2. You know, the bill does contain the statutory language to pre-fund OPEB. That's the retiree health care. Just by pre-funding and enacting that statute and committing to the higher appropriations needed to pre-fund, we shed over $1.7 billion of unfunded liability off the balance sheet. The reason we can do that is because of the quirks of accounting rules for governments and the fact that we can discount our liabilities using a 7% rate of return if we're pre-funding, rather than a really, really low, like 2.2% rate that's tied to the municipal bond rate. So I see Senator Russell had a question.
And that leaves how much in the hole? Is that?
Those numbers are on table 6 on page 8. Which we'll do in a second. So to answer your specific question, Senator, if you take a look at line 4 on table 6, that shows you the difference in the unfunded healthcare liabilities under status quo PAYGO and pre-funding for each system.
So you can see it, that's where you that's where you're coming to the 2 billion.
More than half of it.
Yeah, it takes just about half.
Yeah.
It actually takes more than half of it.
For the teachers.
Well, if I pre-fund for the teachers, it's 667 versus 1.5.
It was reduced by
That's
836.
667 is what's left, so the reduction is the 836.
That's
Yeah,
what you
it
need to
is state, so it's more, a little more than half.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
And same thing on the state.
It really has a tremendous impact.
One thing that to keep in mind with pre-funding OPEB is it's going to require about $15 million of general fund next year in order to transition to pre-funding. And the reason why that is because the numbers that were included in the governor's recommend did not reflect the numbers that are required to pre-fund. They reflected sort of status quo PAYGO. On the teacher side, the normal cost would be funded out of the ed fund, but there's a small gap of about $5.5 million that needs to be made up for on the unfunded liability side to make sure that we are not only paying money to sufficiently fund the cost of providing healthcare to today's retirees, but we're making payments toward paying off that unfunded liability we've already accrued. So the governor's recommend reflected a number around 29 million, which is analogous to the PAYGO amount. The number needs to be adjusted upward by about $5.5 million, which is much closer to what status quo is in FY22. The other reason why there's a bit of a resource need on the state employee OPEB is because, remember that we fund the state employee benefits differently. There's not a line item in the big bill to fund those. Instead, it's funded through the appropriations you make to all the departments that hire active members. So that cost is borne by a payroll rate that's assessed to all the different funds of state government based on their share of the active payroll. The number built into the budget is, I believe, 25%, which is analogous to status quo, but it's going to require additional money to move to pre-funding that some of the special funds don't have the capacity to absorb. So for FY23, there's going to be a need to cover that to the tune of about 10 million or 9 and change. So you add that plus the state or the teacher need on the OPEB, and you get to about $15 million.
And those are viewed as one-time transition because the COLA and especially the contribution pieces grow over years, so the pressure comes down. you're funding with one time the transition, but as those contributions go up, the total funding pressure changes in the next few years out, so.
You're not getting, the contribution is being ratcheted up, so during that period of time before you get to that, you know.
You have that fiscal.
That mature contribution, you're having to plug some money
Yeah,
in.
you have a bigger fiscal gap in year one because of the time and nature of those other changes. And that gap shrinks over time.
There's two other quick things I want to mention on page 2. One is the year-end surplus construct. One part of the recommendations from the task force is to reconfigure your existing year-end general fund surplus construct. So right now, 50% of your unreserved, undesignated GF surplus is slated to go to the state employee OPEB. And that's where they got $52.4 million last year, which is a huge help toward them beginning pre-funding. Moving forward, the recommendation is to take that and instead split it equally, 25%, 25% to the two pension systems.
Where's that showing?
It will be here under year-end
Year-end
surplus construct. And that would begin in FY23. It wouldn't begin in FY22. So the intent here is, you know, you're not committing or reserving anything above beyond what you're currently doing. You're just reallocating that 50%. So instead of it all going to one bucket, it gets split equally into the two pension systems, which again will further accelerate the improvements of the health of those pension funds. It's difficult to predict what that number will be from year to year because it's up to you all and it's up to how revenues are trending and everything else. But it will have a positive impact, having more dollars going in above the actuarially recommended amount.
And the plus.
Correct. All those beneficial impacts compound on one another. One other thing I'm going to mention here before I move on, you're going to see some language in the strike all that is going to be like, what is this and what does it have to do with changing the pensions? It has to do with reporting requirements. Something that came up in conversation is, you know, when Act 75 was passed last year, it created some new language around the frequency of what we call experience studies and asset and liability studies. So we used to do experience studies every 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
The language now changes that to every 3 years. That's when the actuaries do a deep dive. They look in the rearview mirror. They see what happened to the plan over the last couple of years. How did that compare to our assumptions? And do we need to change our assumptions? There was some ambiguity in Act 75 about what do we mean by years? Does it mean the anniversary of the date of the last time the study was done? Or does it mean every 3 fiscal years worth of data? The legislative intent during that discussion is every 3 years worth of fiscal data. So we added the word fiscal where appropriate, and you will see some language that delays the onset of these requirements by 1 year. The reason why is if you go back 3 years, the last time they did experience studies was based on the FY19 valuation. Fast forward, the next round, 3 years later, would be based on the FY22 valuation. Problem is, a lot of these changes aren't going to take effect until FY23. So doing this would give the trustees the option of delaying that first study by a year so it can reflect FY23 data and actually reflect the changes that are being proposed in this package. My concern is if you don't do that, you might spend a lot of time and effort on producing a study that is immediately stale and doesn't reflect the new reality. So this would extend that by 1 year. So the 23 data, should the trustees decide to do it, they can do the studies to reflect 23, and then it's every 3 fiscal years after that. Moving on to page 3, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here because we've already gone through this on the slides from January, but this chart just sums up all the different changes that are being proposed to the benefit structure for the state employee pensions. So you can see the current state, the proposed state, some comments here, and which section of the bill you'll see this language for all 3 employee groups of the VSERS system. And I have a little note here that just describes what Group C, Group D, and Group F are as a reminder. It's right at the top in the banners there. On page 4, you will see the chart of the proposed BSERS pension employee contribution rates. So the contribution rates, these were offered by the, I should have said this at the outset, all of these recommendations were offered by the respective employee groups, and they were adopted by the task force unanimously. That included these proposed increases to employee contribution rates. You can see here that Group C, the law enforcement group, they're proposing 0.5% increases per year for 3 years. So that would, the phase-in would happen in FY23 and be fully done by FY25. Group D and Group F mirror each other. They have proposed transitioning away from the current structure of flat contribution rates and moving to something tiered. And the thinking behind this is that salary quartiles would be calculated on an annual basis. Where your base, for each group, where your base hourly wage falls will determine what rate you pay. And that rate would then be assessed on every dollar you earn that year. So unlike an income tax or something like that, the rate wouldn't change if you make more money from overtime or anything else like that due to administrative reasons. It'd be based on your base pay and charged on every dollar you earn that over the course of that fiscal year. The table.
But is your return based on your total salary, or is it?
It'll be based, the rate you pay will be based on which quartile your base salary falls in. And that will be the rate you pay that year. So if you are to get a whole bunch of overtime, your rate is not going to change as a result of that overtime. It's going to be the same rate charged on every dollar. So it's going to be based on where your base salary falls.
My question is, though, at the end, we've heard some state agencies were, the last year or two, they were getting a lot of overtime.
Oh, that's to inflate the 50% of your 3 highest years. It was spiking. But this has to do with your contribution here. But if you're spiking, you're going to be, well, you'll be paying on your base salary, not on the spiked wages. I think that's what you're.
Well, I'm wondering if, so I retire after I've worked these 2 years and 3 years with this overtime, and my salary's gone up, say, 10 grand a year. Am I gonna retire on that salary with that extra 10 grand? Or am I gonna retire on the salary of my normal?
Just 3 highest.
It will be on your highest years. And I think one of the reasons why it was envisioned to work this way is one, for administrative. And another one is a lot of people in the state workforce who work overtime don't necessarily, it's not necessarily voluntary. So this was flagged as a way to not penalize people who may earn more money from working involuntary hours above their normal schedule.
Well, it's a bonus, you know.
There, and to your point, Senator Starr, about sort of spiking, if you will, there are some guardrails in place already in statute that limit just how much your salary can increase.
You had to do that.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, that's already in place and has not changed.
Okay.
Table 3 will show you the estimates in millions of how much these contribution rates are likely to yield. Again, there's a range of error with all these numbers because these are based on some growth assumptions and some actuarial analysis, but you don't necessarily know what the payroll is going to be from year to year. You know, we're riding a lot of vacancies right now. So it's something to be mindful of that, you know, some of these long-term estimates are subject to slight changes because you just don't necessarily know what your payroll will be. But we can make some assumptions based on the assumptions in place.
Yeah, I got a letter from somebody down the way, some school principal, had like 16 vacancies in there.
Oh, that had to do with the bill in education and around contracts and.
I mean, I couldn't believe it.
And being able, you know, the deadline to give notice. That you were taking another job, and it was they were concerned about what the education committee was doing that would actually make that problem even worse. That section got dropped.
Yeah, they took it out, thankfully. But that was gonna be.
But that had to do with a hiring commitment.
So that's the quick overview of the changes that are proposed for the state employee benefits. I'm going to pivot over real quick to the teachers, and that begins on the bottom of page 5. Start by going through the proposed benefit changes, very similar to the state employees, but a lot more straightforward because there's only one employee group that we have to sort of tailor this to. Again, they're proposing some changes to the COLA benefit, which will result in some reduction in the unfunded liability of about $35 million and the ADAC savings of about $4.8 million. So some of that would accrue to the ed fund, some of it would accrue to the general fund, and some of it, a very, very small piece would accrue to the LEAs on their federally funded staff. The reason why COLA changes don't yield as much savings for the teachers as it does for the state employees is because the teacher COLA benefit is already a little less generous than the benefit for the state employees. State employees can get a COLA within some limits that's based on 100% of the net change in the consumer price index. One of the teachers, it's 50% of that net CPI change. So that's why when you make some changes to the COLA benefit, there's a little less juice to squeeze on the teacher side. But why that's an important distinction is one of the provisions that we are continuing to work through is one of the recommendations says that when the teacher pension system is in a better place, 80% funded, that the COLA formula should be gradually increased over a period of time in 7.5% annual increments till you eventually get to 100% of that CPI, which is what the benefit the state employees currently have is pegged at. So the thought behind that was this would also only apply to members who retire after next June 30th, 2023. The thinking behind that is the active members who have paid the higher contributions contained in this proposal for at least 1 year would then be the ones to basically enjoy some of the result of helping make the near-term sacrifice of improving the health of the pension system, that when the pension system is in a better place, that benefit can gradually be ratcheted up. We are still working through how to take this idea and put it into legislative language that passes actuarial muster. It sounds very simple. It actually ends up being a whole lot more complicated whenever you start putting words to paper. But that is a known area that sort of, that's exactly right. So the language may create a process of future decision making rather than immediately guaranteeing it in the letter of the statute that you pass now.
So once we pass it over to the House, they'll keep working on, or you'll keep working on the update.
Well, we may have to have it, but if we can get that recommended language from the treasurer, say by Friday, then we could do it. The goal was to have this so that the House could simply agree, concur, and all of this would be worked out before the bill got over, because they were dealing with reapportionment and so many other things.
Does this have to be out of here Friday?
Well, that would be our goal, but if the treasurer can say, I can get you something by Monday or Tuesday, we could ask for, or we could move it out and then do an amendment. I don't want. Yeah, so that's the other option. I know that Becky's been having a lot of conversations, more than she probably ever anticipated with the treasurer.
She don't get many words in.
All right, they've been really great to work with. Which is I said they've been really great to work with.
And on that vein, I'd also, while we're on the record here, I note that we, as a staff person, I'm very grateful not only for the cooperation of the treasurer and her team, but for the employee groups as well that have been instrumental in this process. Anytime something has been flagged as, hey, wait a minute, as we start translating this recommendation into statutory language, a little hiccup emerges. They've been incredibly helpful with trying to troubleshoot it and work through it. Yeah, so I want to say that on the record that I'm grateful for their cooperation throughout this process, which is continuing. It's truly been a team effort to try to get this right. Page 6, we're almost to the end. Teacher contribution rates. Again, like the state employees, teacher contribution rates are proposed to increase over a phased period of time. A little different for the teachers though. The teacher system is envisioned to be more progressive, like an income tax. So the way this is envisioned to work is once a year, your contract salary would be used to figure out which of 5 salary brackets you fit within. An effective rate would then be calculated based on where your contract salary falls in the brackets. And that effective rate will be charged on every dollar you earn that year. So it's not like with the state employee side where there's specific quartiles where it's like, if I'm in the second quartile, this is the rate I pay. A little more nuance here, and it's a little bit more of a gradual glide path from sort of salary level to salary level. So that's a key distinction in the difference. But if you look at the bottom of table 5, you can see what the additional revenue is expected to yield for the next few years. So we're looking at, by FY25, about $10.3 million of additional revenue.
So what happens if you're at, in the middle there, the middle tier?
Yep.
And you make 78,900, what do you pay on that 78,900, or do
Yes.
you pay the average in that?
These brackets should be read as every dollar you earn between those brackets is charged at that rate.
So it's you'd pay 7.5% on whatever it was you earned in that.
In that bracket, correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're out in FY25 and you've got, a $79,000, you pay 6.25 on your first 40,000 of income, 6.75 on the 20,000 of your income that falls between 40 and 60,000. And then you'd pay 7.5 on that remaining, 19,000 and change that falls in
What
that.
are they paying out,
Depends on your date of hire. You're either paying 5% or 6%.
So they're gonna get bumped up quite a bit.
Correct, but one important thing with all of these contribution increases is that they're phased over time. And the intent behind that is so if you're getting salary increases over time, you're not going to take home less as a result of the rate going up.
Yeah.
So one important thing to think about with the VSERS contributions is, when you look at the tiers, you could see how there could be some cliffs where if your salary suddenly brings you from the second quartile to the third quartile, your contribution might jump by a bit.
Your take home is.
But your take home is going to be bigger because the jump is going to be less than your step increase is going to be.
Yeah.
So the thinking here is your rate goes up while your salary is projected to go up as well. So.
Well, and as that rate goes up and you get older, your health gets paid off and you don't spend as much money. And so you actually can, don't you give it all away, Alice.
Wait a minute, Senator Starr.
Yeah.
How can you say that?
Pardon? No,
How
but
can you say you spend less?
I spend less now and have a lot less than I used to.
Well,
But depends on your position in life.
Yeah.
And there's.
I guess.
So we're almost finished here. We already covered a lot of what's in page 7, which is the impact of that one-time and recurring money. We sort of let off with that, but this just expounds on it a little bit more. The OPEB stuff begins on the bottom of page 7 and into page 8. And this chart here in table 6 will show you what the impact is of pre-funding. And you can see that a lot of this has to do with the different rate of return on line 1. So on line 4, you can see that massive reduction in unfunded liabilities, $891.3 million on the state employee OPEB, $836.8 million on the teacher OPEB. And the language that you will be reviewing in the amendment pre-funds or establishes a funding system to fully fund the benefits by 2048, which sounds like a really long way off, but in this world, it's not.
So whoever comes after this is gonna come into a different fiscal environment than we inherited, frankly. And I look back and I say, I can't believe it. This was back when we had waterfall and we were buying piano to the, at the same time we were underfunding teachers. It just absolutely was insane.
Well, but no one talked about.
Really?
No one talked about it at all.
What
And
bothers
so, if anything, it has brought us, I think, to a heightened awareness of, if you're gonna put a benefit in place, like healthcare, you've got to say, how do we fund it? And it's easy to say, let's have another benefit, or let's do this, or whatever, but that's why I was making my comments about it's nice to, on that moderate needs group, but what they're really talking about is government providing more services to more Vermonters, and that comes at a cost, and people would like to socialize that cost. So this is an example of short-term expediency, and the price you pay when you finally deal with it is, fairly extraordinary, between the one-times as well as, getting the pre-funding simultaneously with the pay-go, which is what we're having to do here.
Really?
So,
But if you really want to get depressed,
what?
what bothers me about those days when we had all the waterfall money, weren't paying our bills, I didn't gain the waterfall money either, so.
Oh,
So that was bad. The ones that got the waterfall money at least got something.
so, other questions of Chris? I know Becky's here to kind of go through.
Oh, that's good, Chris. She's gonna get going.
Madam Chair, the only comment I wanted to draw your attention to before seating the chair is there's some money tables on the bottom of page 9 and over on page 10. One of the things that's really interesting about the table on page 10 is it sort of shows you the big picture across both systems. And you can see here at the top, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, the OPEB unfunded liabilities are larger than the pension unfunded liabilities for the state employees. You can see here what the new state resources are committed to each sort of employee system are relatively close in parity. And as well as so are the impacts toward the unfunded liabilities at the very bottom. So that's how you get to the over $2 billion of unfunded liability reduction. There's caveats all over these documents that these are based on our best assumptions based on what we know right now, based on the actuarial assumptions in place at the time. We all know that there is a range of error with all things actuarial. So that is something that I just want to keep in the back of your minds, that at the end of the day, whenever we talk about savings to the ADAC, it's good to view them in the context of relative savings or the but-for savings. This is the impact that this activity has, assuming everything else is met, everything else is equal under status quo. We know that the reality is a lot more complicated than that. So I don't want you to come back a year from now and say, you said this was going to go down by 5 million, because if the investment markets go down, that may not show, you may still be paying the same amount. It's all relative. So
the small print covers Chris's work.
I sure hope so. I did not ask, I didn't ask any attorneys to review it to be if it's a good enough disclaimer, but I wanted to at least mention that that's the dirty 4-letter word risk. That's what we mean.
Oh, yeah,
So we can't predict the future. We could try.
Well, the only thing I can say, teachers can't live to be 104. I mean, as Bobby said, how could we be, the actuary be that far? And the demographics, I believe, accounted for 42% of the underfunding. And teachers are well known, kind of.
So the demographics were,
I think out of that 300 million underfunding that we got hit with last time, as a result of the review and the true up with the assumptions with actual experience.
So, and I don't think you can say definitively that, because as I was growing up, life expectancy was in the 60s. Late 60s.
Well, I don't know what it is now, but we know for teachers.
It's in the late 80s.
It is.
It's about 90 now, yeah.
It's well, it's about 8. Male teachers are a little less than.
So it's predominantly female. And then there's a strong correlation between socioeconomic and educational levels. And so you have this, very homogeneous group with all the attributes of longevity. And so I think Senator Starr said we ought to fire our actuary on this. But the other thing is we shortened it from 5 to 3 years. And we've got a pension oversight. So I think there's been awareness that we've got to really pay much closer attention than simply here's the letter from the treasurer's office saying this is the amount of the ADEC.
No.
My only thing is, I'll bet you're wrong in that, I'll bet you people are gonna live longer.
Actually, they're saying now that we're seeing some.
You pay money on people.
A lot depends on the subgroup that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Living shorter.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, but before I go, if you really want to, if you have interest in sort of seeing how the relative impact of all the different factors have been to each system, we have data tables at the very end of the pension task force report, which there's a link to on here, and it's on the JFO website, and the task force has one as well. You can see it all. The different systems are impacted different ways. Demographics, huge with the teachers. Retirement net turnover behavior was really large too. People entering the workforce and leaving the workforce at different rates. But that's why we do experience studies. That's why every system does them, is to do that.
What happens, say a teacher changes professions after, say, 10 years, do they keep their money in, or do they usually take their money with them?
They are able to keep their money in and get a benefit as long as they have at least 5 years of service.
They have to be vested.
Yeah, 5 years of service is how you vest, but you can't start drawing the benefit until you reach certain ages. So I have it in Philadelphia, I'm entitled to a benefit, but I can't get it for another 25 years.
Well, can you cash it out?
You can,
Well,
in certain situations.
see, a lot of teachers did that back,
Yeah,
what was it,
some
20,
state employees,
25 years ago?
state employees did that, a lot of them did that too.
Yeah, they cashed it out and went to a different.
Yeah, and then the market went down and all of a sudden what they thought was so wonderful turned out to be a little more risky.
It turned out.
Becky, do you have some comments that you want to make in terms of
Becky's given me an updated version, so.
I didn't realize, how long going? Because I don't have an aide here on Wednesday afternoons.
Okay, all right, thank you,
I'm
Dick.
gonna swap out your
Thank you.
S286.
You leaving?
We'll see you in the morning. We'll see you in the morning. Are we gonna do a vote on this?
No, not today, Dick, we'll wait.
Okay. I'll see you
Drive
tomorrow.
safe.
I will. We'll see you tomorrow, Bobby.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the record, Becky Washington, Legislative Council, you have in front of you a amendment that is drafted as a strike-all amendment to S286, to the Government Operations, and hot off the press. As Chris mentioned, it is strike-all just because there were changes in multiple sections and instances of amendment, I think would have been pretty confusing to follow in this case. Although it's not, they're not a lot of major changes. It's, I guess the comments I would want to make, and I've highlighted in here where it is language that has changed from the version that was passed out of GovOps. So a lot of the changes, I think, were an effort to clarify, to make sure that what was in the recommendations actually lined up with the language. It was, I think as we've said, it took a lot of people to kind of like review everything and make sure that the words were actually matching what came out of the task force. So that's where you'll see a lot of changes.
The darkened.
Yeah, so, this is not colored copy, so it's a little harder to read, but it should be shaded there for you. And some of the changes were just reorganizing the section because also, Chris mentioned this, that these statutory provisions are pretty sort of not well drafted, I guess I'll say. Just come out and say that. So putting in these changes, it actually made them, yeah, it got pretty complicated and confusing to read. So in some instances, it was easier to just strike out everything and redo it to make sure that it was actually capturing the intent of what the task force recommended. So
For example, on page 55, the comment was, we pushed out, in the 3-year period, but starting July 1st of 2023. That was one of the last ones you made, for example, at least one every 3 fiscal years. On page 55, you said you changed the year.
Yes.
Moved it out a year, so that's where that is being done.
The section, all right, sorry, that 55, section 15, line 14. That is the, yes, that is one of the reporting requirements that Chris mentioned.
It got changed,
Yes.
just hot off the press. Okay.
Should have been in the other bill because this is not shaded.
I want to double check that one. That wasn't in the bill as introduced.
That one was.
Yeah. I may have not caught everything to be shaded, but I think that one was actually in the bill as introduced. So I can walk through, I guess, the shaded language or.
Well, is the shaded language more around the contributions, the particulars in terms, I know that we're trying to slot, for example, with state employees, that they're gonna get a pay increase the 1st of July.
Yeah, so.
And so the commissioner said it would make much more sense to do it simultaneously, calculate the rate and then slot to the quartile all in one exercise. So there's a lot of reference to.
Yeah, so you'll see that the contribution sections for the state employees and for the teachers are all highlighted. So that the state employees, those are on page 20, it starts on page 23. So some of these changes here do reflect how the quartiles are determined at the first full pay period in each fiscal year and effective in the first fiscal year. And those were comments sort of from an implementation perspective from DHR. I will note that I think Chris also mentioned this, that the teachers' COLA and the contributions for the teachers are in this bill, but I think those, as you heard, those are sections that are still being discussed in terms of getting the language right. For instance, for the COLA, there's a threshold at 80% when the CPI formula changes, and I think that is something that I think the treasurer is still connecting with the actuaries on.
Yeah, we're hoping she can get you some language that doesn't create that fiscal obligation to recognize that cost that may or may not happen, so.
And I can just highlight some of the other changes, like there's a lot of changes around that's highlighted around the group D member language. This is not a substantive change, it's just, this is an example of where where I was working with the treasurer's office to try to make sure that the language was saying what the task force recommendation was actually getting at. And part of the issue there was that certain group team members were carved out of the changes. So the language was just sort of tweaked to clarify sort of who is captured in different changes. Like, for example, you know, the final salary at retirement is different based on when you retire and your years of service. And so that was, I think the language was not as clear and the bill was passed out of government operations. So that, I think, reflects a lot of those group D changes, and that has been run by the judiciary, and they were okay with how it was
But
redrafted.
that's more clarification
Yeah, those are
as
clarifications.
opposed to actual change.
She's
And
like page, you know, if you look just thumb through it, from like page 9 on, there's quite a few changes and a lot of striking, you know.
right, and that is all with respect to the group D clarifications. And I think that goes until page 11.
Yeah, and then we get a bunch more.
And then starting at the bottom of page 11 is the COLA section for the state employees. And again, there's a lot of striking out and new language, but this was a section that that provision was just really not well drafted, and so it's complicated to put
Now,
in.
is that existing law, or is that why it's in here and it's aligned to it?
Yeah, so the existing law is struck out. That's what that's reflecting, and it is.
Not just the draft bill that.
Right.
Yeah, it's existing law, and then you put the new stuff in.
Right, but the new language is not all new in the sense that it's just rewriting what was existing law in a way that will make sense to everybody.
How are you gonna know which is existing and which is?
You know, by the
new?
time Jeanette
When you
reports
report
this,
it.
they're gonna be so glazed over, because I'm only doing the money. I'm only in charge of the money.
Who's reporting the rest of it? Jeanette?
Jeanette,
Jeanette.
Jeanette was, and Sarah Copeland Hans is co-chair of the task force. And so they worked with the unions that came up with different proposals around closing the COLA, so it reduced it from 5 down to 4. Instead of 1, lowered it to 0 if there was none. The different proposals in terms of the contribution increases, and for the teachers, they wanted to get into more progressive. All of that was thought options were put out over the summer, and so that the actuaries looked at the different options and what would be the return. So Jeanette will be doing a lot of the bill, but in terms of the money relative to, you know, what we've talked about today, to do the funding. So we're going to split up the presentation as well.
I think it would be helpful, there's one section that I think it would be helpful to get some direction on how the committee would like me to draft the language on. And I can point you to that, and that's on page 8. So one of the recommendations was to add a longevity incentive for Group C members.
Oh, I know, and I wanted you to make that clear, because, and I thought Chris had mentioned it to you, or maybe he hasn't had a chance to. That had to do with, you know, if you came back and could you start all over, and that was obviously.
Right, yeah, so I didn't know what the direction was, so it sounds like you'd like, so the issue, just for the rest of the committee, is that the change in the mandatory retirement age for Group C from 55 to 57.
Which is police, this is the police, just the police.
Yeah.
In combination with this incentive for folks who have 50 years of service, 50 years old and 20 years of service, could create a situation where you could retire at 50 and then come back into service, you know, just a few months later. And because you get, it would give you the opportunity to essentially start a second retirement allowance. And you would have time to vest, but because you can now retire at 57 instead of 55. So you would need that 5-year vesting period. So you would have.
Which was not the intent. It was to raise the 55 to 57. So hopefully we can get that clarified.
If I may, Madam Chair, earlier today I ran into the head of the Vermont Troopers Association and raised this concern with him, and he asked me to reiterate to you that he is in concurrence with our assessment that this was never the intent behind the recommendation, and he is completely fine with making whatever adjustments, they would just request to see the language.
It's nice that they confirmed our recollections.
We just move it from 55.
Well, we've got to make sure the language precludes what Becky's just talked about, where you could leave and then come back and still have sufficient time to get
Another one.
vested again.
Double dipping.
So I think what I will draft then is that in order to receive the incentive, you cannot also be getting a second allowance essentially.
Well, right.
Yeah, and if I may, we may also need to put something in to preclude or restrict one's ability to be rehired once they've already retired.
Well, you can rehire, but the question is, you can't somehow manipulate it so it ends up.
Or there may be a way that you could be rehired but not get a separately computed pension benefit for
Something
your,
like that.
for your
Yeah.
period of restored service.
That's better.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it would just have to be specific to this
Group C.
Yeah.
group C in this situation. So I don't know if there's any actuarial concerns with that, but I can just touch base with the treasurer's office on that language.
I think it'd be actual concerns if we didn't close that loophole,
Yeah.
frankly. Otherwise, it seems like we've got a pretty good estimate. This doesn't change it. All it does is clarify or address to make sure that the agreement, as we all understood it, somehow can be circumvented.
Yeah, and if I may, the entire intent behind this recommendation is, right now, very few Group C members work past age 50 if they have at least 20 years of service. So this would provide an incentive for somebody to continue their service
Well,
yeah,
yeah, stay
at
where
a later age than 50.
Much better for them.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. No, we would really like to have you think about how to craft the language to address that very situation.
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to?
No, I mean, I think I spend a lot of time with the treasurer's office on the state employee system part of the bill, the first part of the bill, but I think as was mentioned, we're still waiting for some proposed language for the teachers, so I think that is TBD right now.
And they were meeting tomorrow.
I think tomorrow, yes.
I got a note from Jeff Hanlon saying they were working on it. And so the question is, some of the districts have no problem to implement this new system that is progressive. Others are saying it would take some resources, but we're in our financial construct where the change in contribution was projected to increase contributions by 6.3 million. So it's really important to get that implemented, and we may, if a couple of schools say they're going to have some trouble, we can always give them fund some additional resources because the return is so significant. But that's what we're trying to work on, plus the language around once the fund gets to 80%, start ratcheting up the COLA from the 50% CPI up so there's parity with state employees.
A lot of work to do, everybody.
Yeah. I only came in at the tail end. Chris had the pleasure all summer.
Well, the tail was pretty smart.
Madam Chair, if it wasn't for you, I don't think we would have continued the work beyond December.
you're the folder you can't put on home.
Yeah, in this case, I think the whole state.
But that's really good to get this.
Senator Tisch a little while.
And I want you to know, because I wasn't a member of the task force,
You didn't get paid.
I didn't get paid a dime.
But you don't collect it even when you do get paid.
Well,
She will eventually,
Expensive.
but if we don't, we have to
I-
go
my
down and do
expenses-
it for her.
I think you're gonna have to help me.
You do it before the fiscal year goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to.
You could do a charitable donation to the state and take it off your taxes.
Otherwise, our credit rating is gonna take a big hit that day you take your expenses.
Yeah, that's right.
But I don't get expenses for any of this either in December. Like I remember barreling down from a meeting in Newport to meet in the Ethan Allen room. And it's like, not only am I giving my time, I'm also paying to come here. So,
Yeah, I think you can write that off.
but, I
If you
thank
donate
you,
your
thank you very
time.
much. And you must be feeling kind of close to the finish line in terms of where you are with this then, I hope.
My mental finish line, yes.
Your mental finish line, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is close. I think we just have to,
Those two
there's a
pieces.
few more pieces that are open on the teacher side, I think, and it sounds like they're close to resolving that.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks a
All
lot.
right, so, committee, this is, we're getting close to 4:30, so unless there are further questions, I'm going to adjourn for today.
Let's